Welcome once again to the Bike Show, and an episode in which we'll be catching up with some international bike news. We'll also be chatting to a South African mother of two who manages to find the time outside of a demanding career to race a Ducati. And since Ducati South Africa are the sponsors of this week's episode, I thought we'd start our news roundup with something from the Italian manufacturer. Before we get on to the latest debuts in their recent blitz of new models, let's just consider the company's latest financial results. These are the sort of boring, dry numbers that we never talk about on the Bike Show, and for good reason. But I think it's fair to say that 2020 has been an extraordinarily tough year for businesses, big and small, and obviously for bike manufacturers as well. Like many of its competitors, Ducati implemented a stay-at-home and work from home policy earlier this year, which is difficult when you run a factory, and they actually stopped production at that factory completely for 6 weeks. But even though Italy has been one of the countries most severely affected by the pandemic, they have reported record-breaking third quarter financials. In that quarter, they sold nearly 15,000 bikes worldwide, which is just amazing given what's been going on. And they're not resting on their laurels either, because the new models just keep on coming. On the back of the new Multistrada and of course the Street Fighter that we only got our hands on fairly recently, there is now a new 950 Supersport, a bike that is basically an entry-level sport tourer, or the first rung on the sporting ladder for a new rider aiming at some point in the distant future to graduate to a V4 Panigale. I know. Nearly a full litre of V-twin goodness is now an entry-level bike, but that's just a sign of the times these days. The power output is a useful 110 horsepower, so it's not hypersport territory, but it's enough to be quick on the road and still entertaining if you take it to a track. There's 94 newton meters of torque to go with it, and 80% of that is available from as low as 3,500 RPM. That should make it easy to go quickly, or by the same token, comfortable for just cruising along in a more touring-friendly manner. You can see that there's a definite Panigale family resemblance in the bodywork, especially around the headlights. The handlebar is noticeably higher than on the sportier models, and the seat is longer to accommodate taller riders. There's an adjustable screen too for decent long-distance comfort. The exhaust has got twin end cans, and there's a single-sided swing arm for traditional Ducati good looks. Even though it is sort of an entry-level kind of model, Ducati hasn't exactly skimped on the electronics, with a 4.3-inch TFT screen and all the usual riding modes, traction control, cornering ABS and two-way quickshifter that you would normally only expect to find on the range-topping models. There's even wheelie control in there, which I'm not convinced is really necessary on a 110 horsepower sport tourer, but at least you've got an excuse for not popping the front wheel up when the situation arises. That situation being, well, whenever you have the chance to show off, which is quite often when you ride a red Italian bike. Being a Ducati, there's obviously a S model, which will get you Olin suspension and a cowling for the rear seat to make you look a bit more racy. Pricing is not known as yet, but you'd have to think it's going to start somewhere up around the 250,000 rand mark, maybe even a bit higher. Let's talk V4 now, the flagship model Panigale, which has had a gentle update for 2021, mainly in the electronics department, where traction control has been further refined. There's also now a track riding mode A and B, with A being for perfect track conditions and B, well, B's for a lot of South African tracks. B is designed for bumpier circuits and tracks with lots of slower, tighter corners. Think the bumps of Killarney or the tight turns of Red Star Raceway, where the B mode's reduction of torque delivery in the first 3 gears might help you actually go quicker rather than waste time wrestling with the full Monty beast. And there is now a new limited edition Panigale, the SP. This is the latest in a long line of Ducatis that have worn the SP badging, and it's celebrated by a paint job that closely matches what the race teams use during the winter testing. I think it looks absolutely fabulous, and if I ride it, I'll more than likely feel exactly the same way thanks to 214 horsepower, 124 newton meters of torque and a dry weight of just 173 kilos. These are numbers that Ducati say will make it faster even than the 1000cc V4R, for the simple reason that the SP is the 1100 motor and as a result that bit easier to keep on the boil. Each numbered bike gets carbon wheels, carbon wings, Öhlins smart suspension and perhaps weirdly and most importantly STM Evo dry clutch. The advantages of the dry clutch are supposedly a better slip action, no clutch debris finding its way into the engine oil, and let's face it, the real reason is a chance to sound like a proper racing Ducati. How good is that? Gotta have a dry clutch on a performance Ducati. It's the only way. There's also some serious Brembo Stylema R radial calipers with remote adjustment on the left handlebar, so you can safely twiddle with it during a fast lap, and there's an adjustable lever ratio for that perfect level of feel whether you're on the track or road, as well as some fully adjustable rear sets. This has to be the ultimate Ducati track day weapon, and I can only wish that I'd followed my parents' wishes and gone into banking as a career, because then I might have been able to afford one. Don't go into bike journalism is the only advice I can give you if you like money, because I can't even afford this next model from Ducati, and it has got pedals. They got into E Mountain Bikes last year and their updated models have just been released as well. Better electric motors, updated suspension, yes, there's even a model with Öhlins, but you're still going to be looking at around 100,000 Rand or so. Yeah, I know. In which case, I'd rather have a second-hand Ducati Monster and go jogging to get fit. The electricity angle is a handy link, though, into our next news item, which is a new development we first mentioned back in January. You may remember the Damon Hypersport. It's an electric bike from Canadian startup company Damon. They were claiming a 200 horsepower equivalent bike that could hit 200 miles an hour and have a range of at least 200 miles. The plan was to build 25 first edition models up around the 850,000 Rand range before getting into production of a more standard model, which apparently would still knock you back about $500,000. However, the company has now announced that once these are done next year, 2021 will also see the release of a cheaper set of models in the shape of an SX with about 140 horsepower and a 240 kilometre range for somewhere just under 400 grand, we think. An SE model will also be in the mix, and that will have about 105 horsepower and 160 kilo range and will be in the sort of 300,000 Rand range, maybe a little bit more than that. So, yeah, not so much cheap as just a bit more affordable. These models will all look as swanky as the big ticket version and will, I presume, all feature the company's co-pilot sensors and software that give it a 360-degree surveillance ability that can track up to 64 objects and give you feedback via cameras and haptic feedback through the handlebar and possibly even the seat. Not sure about that last one though. Anyway, as far as ownership, there will be a subscription leasing type of model if you don't fancy laying out all that dosh all at once. This is also a bike, you might recall, that will, at the push of a button and while on the move, change the ergonomics of your bike, apparently. So, knee-down racer to laid-back cruiser on the apex of a 200-kilo turn. Sounds like fun. Yeah, okay, that's a cheap shot, but you know, I hope this comes to life, I really do, but until I see it, I won't actually quite believe it. There's a reason Harley-Davidson is, as yet, the only major motorcycle manufacturer to debut an electric bike. It's hugely difficult and vastly expensive, particularly if you make sport bikes that are already amazing. Why bring an electric bike to market unless it can outperform your current petrol models? Otherwise, it's just a gimmick. That's why when you see anything from the major Japanese or European manufacturers, it tends to be in a segment that isn't defined by performance. BMW has had a successful e-scooter for several years now, though we haven't seen it in South Africa. The state of electric propulsion on two wheels at the moment means that it is better suited to the urban mobility environment. BMW recently showed us the Definition CE 04, which is sort of a concept, but in reality is pretty much a finished production bike already. It looks conceptish because it is quite a radical departure from the usual ubiquitous scooter design, and it's very, very similar to the concept Link that was first shown 3.5 years ago, as you can plainly see. But there's enough clues in BMW's latest press releases to strongly suggest that the CE 04 is essentially a finished product already. So, we have a very funky, contemporary looking scooter that thankfully doesn't look anything like every other big scooter does these days. You're guaranteed to stand out if you ride one of these, which is half the battle when you're selling to a younger urban customer. The other half of the battle is won by being green, which electric is, of course, sort of, unless your electricity comes from loads of filthy coal-powered fire stations like it does in South Africa. And then the final half of the battle, this is blue sky thinking by the way, so don't worry about all the halves, is connectivity. Everything is connected here. Scooter to your phone, scooter to your BMW rider clothing, and even clothing to your phone. The BMW rider parka jacket has a pocket that can charge your phone, believe it or not. Apparently, most journeys in big cities are under 12 kilometres. In fact, many are 5Ks or less, so range isn't a major issue like it still is with battery technology for bigger bikes. You can get 130 Ks out of the scooter, which is plenty, but to get more for a big bike would mean more batteries, more weight, longer charging time. So before you ask, I'd have to say we're still a good few years away from electric superbikes or tourers. Don't worry though, remember this BMW concept? The Vision DC Roadster is still a dream for BMW engineers, and as the technology keeps on improving, then so the reality of this bit of imaginative engineering gets ever closer. But I think it's fair to say it's not going to be a 2022 model. Enough of the new bikes. After this short break, the inspirational story of a South African woman who can do it all, do it with style, and do it quicker than most of the guys too.